Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are sitting. And thank you for joining us today. For the topic of the day, we will have a discussion regarding climate finance for sustainable livestock in Latin America and the Caribbean and pathways towards COP30, which is now taking place in Brazil in a little more than 1 week. So my name is Knut Laxo. I'm head of Norwegian, based in Brazil, head of programs of Future Horizons Institute, which is an independent think tank working at the intersection of climate, nature, and business to help a sustainable and fair world. And this webinar is part of a series we run on various topics addressing critical issues for sustainable development. The webinar today is co-hosted in collaboration with the Climate Policy Initiative, a global advisory organization working towards improving energy and land use policies and financial systems to drive sustainable low-carbon growth. Before we start, I just want to inform all participants and the audience that we will be recording this meeting and it will be later on published on CPI's YouTube channel. So we're following standard data protection practices in line with GDPR. So by being part of this seminar, you consent to this. If you do not want to appear in the published version, then, well, camera off is mandatory, but then refrain from sharing any personal information in the chat. But please, I would encourage all of participants in the webinar to use the chat to post questions and comments. And we have asked our speakers to try to address these throughout the meeting. And we have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. And if you have specific questions to some of the presenters, you can tag their name in the chat. And then we will get back to and try to address as many as possible of these questions. But now, turning to the topic of the day, which is about livestock, sustainable livestock and climate finance. As you all probably know, livestock production plays a vital role in the Latin American regions when it comes to food security, rural employment, and exports. But at the same time, it's also one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions and a key driver of land use changes. So how to reconcile these realities is a really big challenge and something that for sure will be discussed during COP30. How can we meet development and climate goals? And in order to do so, financial flows must shift towards more sustainable livestock systems. So that is the sort of starting point for our discussion today. And this webinar is based on a report that was published by CPI earlier this year, called Climate Finance Roadmap for Livestock in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is an in-depth analysis of investment needs, funding gaps, and the opportunities how to transform this sector. So we hope that with COP30 approaching in Belém, this roadmap is a vital piece of evidence and demonstrating some strategic pathways how to mobilize climate finance at scale. And we will, in the discussion today, look at how different forms of finance, whether public, private, or blended, can support innovation, restore degraded pastures, and hopefully enhance resilience across the livestock systems in the region. With me today, I have three presenters. First one out is Alexander Kircher from CPI. And he is one of the authors and will also present key findings from the roadmap. Alexander is a sustainability analyst specializing in climate finance, agri-food systems, and blended finance strategies for low-carbon development. And his work focuses on mobilizing investment for climate-smart agriculture, addressing finances gap in vulnerable sectors, and he's a senior analyst and former economist at Vivid Economics and McKinsey Companies. The second speaker is Carlos Klink. He's an academic and also the former Secretary for Climate Change at the Brazilian Ministry of Environment, and he will reflect a bit on policy implications. He is a leading Brazilian ecologist, where his research focuses on land use change, tropical savannas, biodiversity, and socio-environmental impacts of agricultural expansion. He's a professor at the University of Brasilia, and he bridges science and policy and how to advance low carbon development and climate resilience. And last but not least, we have with us Gabriela Zangiski, which is also part of CPI from the Rio office, and she will share some regional insights on the implementation and finance trends. She's a Brazilian economist specializing in environmental economics and climate policy, and her research covers climate governance, deforestation, and natural resource economics. She has a PhD in economics and is a senior analyst at CPI and Book Hill, combining economic modeling with applied policy analysis. So our overall goal or objective with this webinar is to have a broader discussion on this topic relating to the climate negotiation leading up to COP30, and hopefully have some solutions as well and highlight some actionable opportunities for collaboration among policymakers, investors, and practitioners. So without further ado, I hand over the words to today's first keynote speaker, which is Alexander Kircher, and he will present main findings from CPI's Climate Finance Roadmap for Livestock in Latin America. Alexander, over to you.
Great, thanks, Knut. Great to be here, and thanks for having me. Yes, so today I'll be talking about a recent paper we published at CPI, so focusing on Latin America and the Caribbean, and more specifically livestock systems in the region. So we know, these systems are a major source of GDP, employment, food security, but also require significant changes and significant capital flow to enable these changes. And I'm going to try and run through these key points in this presentation. So next slide. So we know that livestock is a major source of GHG emissions. This is true globally, which you can see on the left, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean, which I'll be focusing on today. I think everyone here will know this already, but so livestock emissions account for about 50% of ag emissions, which themselves account for 30% of global GHG emissions. In Latin America, you can see on the right, so the breakdown of emissions across sectors. Land use and agriculture are 50% of the sectoral emissions, and about 30% of that links back to livestock. And beyond emissions, there's obviously other negative externalities, deforestation in Brazil, for example, as one example. And so there's this real importance between trying to juggle to keep the systems going, because they're extremely important for smallholder livelihoods and more generally livelihoods and economic security in the region. But we need to do so in a way that's better environmentally. Next slide. So CPI is firstly a global leader in estimating climate flows and climate finance. And some of that work focuses on agri-food systems. And you can see some of our findings here. When we look, so on the left, you've got the global estimates for average finance towards livestock systems and how much we think is needed. But let's focus on the right-hand side, which looks at that for Latin America and the Caribbean. You can see that we're not even 1% toward what's required. So we think there is roughly a $20 to $25 billion yearly need for sustainable livestock systems in the region, and our data set only tracks $100 million a year currently. Some of this is due to our database estimates having some significant uncertainty. Data availability is notoriously poor for the livestock industry, as we all know. But even after having done some work to try and understand what we might be missing, we are still very far from that 25 billion figure a year. And so that's kind of the scene, right? So you have a sector with important GHG emissions and important negative externalities, and that's also not receiving the finance it needs to try and mitigate those and to try and increase resilience towards the future impacts of climate change. So that's kind of the scene setting for this meeting. Can we go to the next slide, please? Before I explain some of the solutions to this GHG issue in the sector, I want to spend a minute defining, I think, what we identified as priority investment areas for sustainable livestock systems in LAC. And roughly, we split our analysis between 5 groups of interventions. So we looked at grassland management, optimizing grazing practices. So then manure management, so reducing emissions and pollution while improving soil health. Silvo-pastoral systems, so integrating trees into livestock systems, and then also sustainable feed production and ag extension, the latter, for example, which can have massive impacts on smallholder farmers who might struggle to get the expertise we need. So these are the sort of solution universes that we're working in, and where we believe that if we can catalyze additional finance to some of those practices, then we can keep up food production, but also do so in a way that will be less negative for the planet and which will pollute less. Next slide. So there's quite a bit going on, but basically for our report, we first looked at barriers to investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's a bit small on the slide, but briefly what we did was we looked at Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and sort of the rest of the region grouped together. We did so as Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, obviously the biggest meat producers in LAC. And for each, we split them between large farming systems and smallholder or family farming systems, as both have very distinct profiles and needs and vulnerabilities. For each, we took a database approach and leveraged experts to come up with 6 risk categories, which you can see on the left of the table. So governance, finance, climate, market, infrastructure, and nature. And we also looked at financial attributes, so investment horizons, ticket sizes, and returns for investments in those directions. And so for all 7 country farm type combinations, we look at how much these barriers limit investment for investors who may want to move into the livestock space in the region. And some of what you see here is pretty intuitive, right? So the sector is obviously affected by several key risks, some of which will include, lack of appropriate tools, perceived high investment risks, limited technical capacity to implement climate-positive solutions, misaligned financial products, and so on. And so what you get is an environment that can be, at times, particularly challenging to invest in. Next slide, please. And so what we did, is we took these characteristics and we compared them to a dozen of investor profiles, which we built, both public and private. You can see the different types of investors on the left of the graph here. And what we did was we tried to map out those risks to what we think the risk appetite of all of those investors are. So some different investors will be more or less suited to investing or to dealing with systemic barriers. And based on those profiles that were built thanks to a wide range of expert interviews, we kind of mapped out who we think in a baseline scenario is best suited to invest. For example, if we take asset managers and look at our 7 different region farm types, we assess how they're suited to invest there, and you can kind of see that as things stand, and again, pretty intuitively, they're not really suited for smallholder farming, finance, and so on. There is also, I think, to be somewhat expected, right? Public investors are well suited across all regions. Private investors face significant barriers, especially for smallholder farming. And this will be because they struggle due to conservative risk appetites and deal size preferences, and also because right now I think investment opportunities in sustainable systems are very scarce. So this was quite a significant part of the work, which was building up the current landscape and understanding the existing issues and barriers inhibiting finance. And then we start to look at types of solutions to help deal with these issues. Next slide, please. So our research broadly looks at 2 types of solutions. The first is redesigning funding mechanisms. So the issue is that traditional lenders avoid livestock investments due to high risk and unfamiliar returns. Some solutions, and you can see answers in that grey bar on the page, and there's more in the paper. Will include tools like blended finance structures that reduce risk for private capital deployment, patient capital, which allows for which enables us to accommodate longer payback periods, credit enhancement mechanisms, which help scale up the capacity of local financial institutions, and so on. So basically, some new financial mechanisms which can help de-risk some of those investments. Then on the, designing robust financial mechanisms is not the be all and end all. It's not enough to fully support the sector. We think there's also a massive need for an improved enabling environment and better policies, which I think the other panelists will talk about. So currently, I think it's fair to say fragmented policies favor conventional systems while creating regulatory uncertainty, which will deter investments, right? And we just don't see the incentives we need for investments being driven towards sustainable system. So what would those solutions look like? So again, only a few of the examples that we list in our report, but broadly that can take the form of coordinated policy frameworks that streamline regulations, mandate maybe carbon standards, support rural infrastructure, and so on. It can include clear land tenure and digital connectivity to enable smallholder access to finance and markets, and overall just changes which reduce investment risk and facilitate the deployment of finance. And so next slide, please. And so while with the slides not changing, oh yeah, perfect, thank you. But yes, and so it's, I think, nice and well to discuss, what solutions we think we need to see, better financial mechanisms, better policy environments. But how do we actually pull on those levers? What do we actually think needs to happen for those changes to see the light? And so we kind of list in the report 7 priority areas which we think should be focused on to increase climate finance to sustainable systems. And so we require specific actions across quite a lot of stakeholder groups. And you can see those 7 groups on the left of the page. These include implementing blended finance approaches, de-risking tools, supportive regulatory environments, diverse and inclusive financial service providers, reducing information asymmetries and improving data availability, and creating better strategic public-private partnerships. And so we spend quite a bit of time discussing for each of the 7 groups, what's the role of the public sector, what's the role of the private sector in trying to make those areas come to fruition. So if we take one row as an example, if we look at de-risking tools, on the public side, credit guarantees and first loss capital can improve financing possibilities. And then on the private side, insurance products for climate-related livestock risks, such as pest and disease risk, can also make it safer for investors to deploy capital. And so this is very much a whirlwind tour of what was quite a lot of work and ways a lot more precise and better explained in the report. We also delved into investment opportunities, so what it looks like to actually invest in livestock systems and what you need to include in your investments to get returns at or around market rates, depending on the context. And I believe Malika will be pasting the link of the report in the chat. Once I'm done, we've also just published it in Spanish and Portuguese, so you have these options depending on what's easier for you. Anyway, I think I'm just over 10 minutes, Knut, so that's kind of the end of my presentation. But yeah, thanks for listening. Very happy to answer any questions about the paper or anything else beyond this.
Thanks so much for that, Alexandra. Very detailed and interesting this presentation. I think also I would encourage all the participants to have a look at the report. It is very, very elaborate and lots of interesting facts and solutions in the report. I would also take the chance to encourage the audience to post your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to respond to these later in the session. Now, I would like to invite the other panelists to provide some of their immediate thoughts, and starting out with Carlos Klink, So, Carlos, from a Brazilian perspective, speaking on behalf of this very big, great country, how do you see the role of climate finance in supporting sustainable livestock transformation? And are there specific research or policy initiatives that we should be aware of in relation to this now ahead of COP30? Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Knut. Let me start my clock so to keep you on the time. Thank you, Alexander. The way I decided to bring the issue is the following. I'll describe some of the policies that are going on in Brazil already. What are the instruments that are in place, particularly coming from the public side? And at the end, I'm going to describe one particular issue that I think is still missing in the entire scenario. There is a lot of convergence on what I'm going to say and what Alex just said on the priorities, insights, and focus, particularly on the underperforming farmers. That's a major issue for all of us. For the past, I'll keep changing my eyes here because I'm using two screens, but for the past 10, 15 years maybe, Brazil actually did a lot, has built a significant framework to deal with those issues in the national policies and regulatory instruments to deal with land use issues, greenhouse gas emissions, green finance. I would point out that maybe the most important ones are of course, the climate change policy of Brazil and Brazil's MDC, the presentation, the commitments of Brazil for the Paris Agreement. The forest code is key to this conversation, really key. Environmental, we have even CPI is recording that, is studying that. Environmental registry, procedures, green assets, it's coming quite strongly actually. We have several resolutions coming from Central Bank, green rural credit, climate risk, that's in place already in the market. A green taxonomy by the Minister of Finance is coming, sort of a guidelines for capital mobilization, a national policy for payment of ecosystem services. And there is a brand new tax policy that also allows, just approved, allows to work on kind of selective taxes for sustainable agriculture, improving land use system, biofuels, etc. So this is my overview. This framework generates a number of very key important instruments in the Brazilian policymaking. Number one, in the form of plans and investment programs. The Ecological Transformation Plan of Brazil, it's a kind of framework, regulatory fiscal credit instruments for green finance. This, for instance, there is one program under the plan already working. It's called Eco-Invest, that basically the federal government is issuing securities in international markets to fund climate change projects. They've been quite successful last year and this year. They use the climate change fund for that, around $2 billion already in place. There's a platform for climate investments. This is started because Brazil had the G20 meetings in Brazil last year. So the Minister of Finance, etc., get together. And the policymakers in Brasilia plus the main bank, the BNDES bank, they have a manual of projects, nature-based solutions, industry, energy, etc. And we have quite a good history in creating public funds and now starting carbon markets. The Climate Change Fund is an investment advisory service. This year, they have $2 billion to invest. The Low Carbon Agriculture Plan came with the policy, so it has over 10 years of investment. The idea is to use well-established, as Alexander pointed out, well-established technologies that are in place already. This year, they are putting $1.5 billion. Those are all public funding, okay? The famous Amazon Fund is a donation form of fund to control deforestation, RED Plus national strategy for our biomes. The Brazilian system for trading greenhouse gas emissions was approved in Congress last year. And just last week, the Minister of Finance created a kind of a special secretariat for the carbon market, so it's coming. And something that the Brazilian government is key to present for COP30, the famous Tropical Forest Forever Fund. It's a Brazilian proposition to create an international long-term blended finance fund to protect forests, not only for Brazil, all over the place. And remember that President Lula committed recently $1 billion to that in September in New York. I would say these all led to quite significant achievements by Brazil in the past 10, 15, 20 years. Reduction of deforestation in the Amazon, quite important. Some reduction of deforestation in the Cerrado savannas, where pasture land, cattle, beef, soy, etc., quite important. That is around, according to our newest NDC, Brazil should be able to reduce around 48% of greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this year in comparison to 2005. We see already in the market agriculture output based more on gains in productivity rather than just expanding areas, particularly also in the beef sector. Development of a green bond markets already around 2 billion, that's private kind of investments in getting maturity in Brazil, around $2 billion. We have maybe around 20 sector strategies. It's not a governmental thing, but coming mostly from the NGOs working with the private sector on soy, beef, governance of supply chain, soy, beef, sugar, ethanol, forestry, etc. And we strongly believe that we have an enormous potential to achieve conservation in private lands if we deploy fully the Forest Code of Brazil. The numbers I have from the Brazilian Forest Services, we might have another 44 million hectares in conservation inside private lands in this country. So it's quite a lot. But there is always a but, right? There is one important element we believe is still missing. For the past 6 months, we mean University of Brasilia, my colleagues at the Market Institute of WWF-US, the CMI program of the Gordon Barrymore Foundation, we are conducting feasibility analysis to solve part of what Alexander pointed out, maybe the most important thing, environmental externalities from land use and food production in Brazil, particularly focus on incentives to underperforming farmers. Good farmers already have a lot of income. Underperforming farmers is key to the whole story. We are studying ways to generate proceeds for, we call it an environmental premium from contributions by international consumers that benefit from Brazil's commodities. Grants, not, sorry, Alexander, I think you're right, but beyond that debt, equity, first loss, we need to focus on incentives for these farmers. So far, we interviewed a big number of institutions, ministries, public banks, public funds, impact investment funds, farmers association, private companies, think tanks, NGOs, etc., research organizations in Brazil and abroad. And we are receiving a very positive feedback. You should look at this issue of underperforming farmers in Brazil. Specifically, we are looking at how and where to collect environmental premiums. That goes straight with your insights. What structure such a fund should have? What are the most important ecosystem services to be supported, MRV systems, etc. We are working on that. Maybe the most important lesson that we learned so far is the following. To successfully develop a climate resilient agriculture, beyond what we have already from the public policies in Brazil, farmers and farmers associations, they have to be engaged upfront to this construction. I mean, we've been talking to loads of people and they say, well, okay, but I need to be part of the solution, of the construction of the solution. So it's not only the funding that matters, but the engagement of farmers and associations is as important. I will stop here. We have a lot of stories of people we are talking to and ideas, and there's a lot of things going on that avenue already in Brazil. Let me stop here. Thank you, Knut.
Thank you so much for that, Carlos. And I have to say that it's really encouraging hearing from you that despite all the massive challenges and the serious underfinancing of the sector, there are so many initiatives still ongoing, and there are important initiatives happening that hopefully will be able to address some of these challenges. We will revert to that discussion later on in this webinar, but right now I would like to hear from our third speaker, Gabriela Zangiski from CPI Brazil, to say a little bit about how do you see the possibility of increasing meat production while reducing pressure from pasture expansion on forest, and also a little bit your thoughts on approaches to leverage, address environmental challenges to face the sector. So with no further ado, over to you, Gabriela.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I hope I can bring some insightful information. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to integrate productivity and climate goals in the Latin America and Caribbean cattle sector. Well, fortunately, we have a lot. There's a lot we can do. But first of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about the sector and understand the context of all this information. Well, this sector is economically huge for the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We produce around 23% of the world's beef production. And this sector holds approximately about 50% of the workforce in the continent. So it's very important here. And we want to hold the economic benefits of the sector, the income, the jobs, and everything that it generates. But this sector is also negatively related to climate goals in two ways. Well, we know that worldwide, usually energy is the most important sector in terms of emission. But in Latin America and Caribbean, the land use and changes in land use are the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And the cattle sector is related to them in two ways. Well, first of all, the activity is a high emitting activity itself. And mostly this emits methane. Most of this methane is emitted through indirect fermentation, which is the digestive process of the animals, but also through pasture and manure poor management. But it's not just the activity that is high emitting, but also this activity presses the forest for more space to create pasture land. So it presses deforestation. And this expansion of pasture land is the main cause of deforestation in several regions, and is pointed out as the main cause for deforestation in the Amazon. So this is something very important that we need to address. And all of this happens because cattle ranching is usually inefficient here, the way that we perform this activity. On average, we have just one animal per hectare. This is a very, very low productivity. In the Caribbean region, this is a bit higher, 1.5 animals per hectare, but in the Amazonian region, the average is less than one animal per hectare. So we need to address this. And we use a lot of land for pasture. For instance, 20% of Brazilian land is pasture land, and this is just cultivated and improved pasture land. The profile is very different among countries. For instance, Argentina has about 3% of their land as planted and improved pasture land, so it's a different system. In Peru is about 11%, but Brazil hosts the Amazon forest and hosts a lot of this production and has this very extensive system that we need to care about and uses a lot of land. So all of this scenario actually creates a very interesting opportunity for us because we have this low productivity activity related to this very high emitting and high pressure on the forests scenario. So it is possible already to increase the agricultural productivity, not just in this sector, but also in others, while decreasing the pressure on the forests. And this creates a very nice opportunity for leadership in sustainable and high productive cattle ranching. And how can this be achieved? Well, a very important way of doing it is to restore degraded land and intensifying the existing pastures. Since we have this very low productivity activity, we can increase technology use, we can increase the productivity of land by restoration. And by doing this, we can decouple agricultural growth from deforestation and align economic development with climate and biodiversity goals. But restoring degraded land is not the only way of conciliating economic growth and climate goals. Well, in the Amazon, we have a non-homogeneous productivity scenario. So for cattle ranching, there are regions that are more productive by nature and some regions that are not. And the same thing happens with carbon storage. So some regions of the Amazon have higher capability of storing carbon and others have a lower capability. And happily to us, these regions usually do not coincide. So how can we make this be efficiently distributed across the territory? So here we have two maps of the Brazilian Amazon. In green, we are seeing the carbon capture potential. The darker the green, higher the potential. So we see that some spots are really more intense carbon sinks. And on the yellow map, we see the agricultural productivity map with, again, the darker tone indicating higher productivity. And notice that these two regions do not coincide. What is darker on the green map is not the darker on the yellow map. So we can allocate and have both things in a way that it generates both more carbon storage and more cattle productivity for us. But how do we do this? Well, one way of making this work and giving the right incentives to this allocation to flow by itself is to having regulated carbon markets and instruments, financial instruments that are based on carbon results. So for instance, the reversing deforestation mechanism is one that can do this. But restoring degraded land and looking into carbon markets are not the only two measures that we can put working to have these two big goals, the economic goal and the environmental goal, being achieved together. We also have a huge list of solutions and opportunities that we can apply to all the countries in Latin America. So the first thing that we need to understand is that giving credit for the producers, just credit alone, doesn't have a lot of effect, especially over the recovery of pasture land. The credit is not capable just by itself to lead to significant changes in land use and significant changes in land quality. So we have to couple it with a lot of other measures. One interesting thing that we can do to prevent that credit has no effect or that can be used to deforestation is to provide incentives for technical assistance and training to the farmers, especially the farmers with lower levels of education. This can enhance a lot the good effects of credit for the farmers and can generate pasture restoration, higher income, greater use of inputs, improved management, and soil conservation. But also, we have to increase monitoring while supplying credit for the farmers. This is essential to prevent further deforestation because sometimes the producers take credit and do not use it as it should be. So we need to check that the property that is taking credit is respecting the environmental laws and environmental requirements for that program. And also we need to check that this credit is not being used for deforestation in the property, but rather for increasing the productivity through technology and through other ways. But we also have other measures that are very important beyond credit and all the things that need to come with it. And one very important thing is to strengthen the governments and the land management, especially in the Amazonian region. A lot of this land is not allocated. We don't have strong property rights, and this generates opportunity for land grabbing and for illegal activities to be performed in the Amazon and other regions. So we have to be very thoughtful about that. Another thing that can also help us is something that Alex already mentioned, that are the integrated production system. When we put this to work, we can have more productivity, and we can provide shadow to the animals. We can exchange nutrients between the soil and the plants that are on it. So all of this can enhance the ecosystem resilience and can increase productivity, and can also abate the methane emissions from the cattle ranching. So this can generate it gives us the possibility of having carbon neutral cattle ranching. And finally, we need to have better, all the countries in Latin America, we need better measurement for pasture degradation. We have public available data on pasture vitality, but this is different from pasture degradation, because pasture degradation is the loss of vitality over time. So this is different from a land that has low vitality by itself. And it also encompasses other elements beyond the loss of vitality. So, for example, soil erosion is one thing that integrates degradation. So we need to fully understand this phenomenon and map this throughout the pasture land to really understand how and where can we apply these precious resources that can help us to increase productivity and protect the land. So this is what I had for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Gabriela, and very interesting. And it seems to me like there's no, discrepancy in terms of a more sustainable production versus productivity or income or revenue. It seems it's more a question of how to make that switch, and the financing gap in order to enable producers to make that switch. And I would like to follow up a bit on this, because in your presentation, Alexander, you went through a lot of what are the gaps, and then the lack of finance, which seems to be it's 0.01% of climate finance is currently allocated towards livestock sector, which is not sufficient by far. Whereas Carlos was also mentioning all these new initiatives coming up. And there's both public and private money, or investments, if you like, coming into the sector. So my question to you, Alexander, very, very bluntly, is what is the problem? What are the critical barriers to preventing this financial flow towards the sector? And as we are talking about both public and private money, blended finance is going to be an important part of the solution. But what then, how should it be designed, and key principles as you see it for design of blended finance mechanisms to enable this? Over to you, Alexander.
Great, thanks. I tried to be brief with my answer, but to try and answer the first question about the financing, the main barriers, I think our perspective, at least, is a lot of it is just the financials not either being understood or being perceived as too risky, right? So I think even in Latin America, you have quite a lot of financial institutions of local banks which might just not have sort of the necessary expertise to understand what investing in livestock might look like. It's considered as too risky. The returns are not high enough, the time horizons are too long, and so this kind of kills the investment opportunity in the bud from the get-go. And so really trying to deal with those issues and make the financial case for those investments is important. And we see that when you deploy say silvopastoral systems, you can get some pretty significant yield improvement, returns, and so on. Like, there is an economic case, there is a business case behind those opportunities. There is just at times a lack of translation from what we know works to actually then at a sort of financier level where it might be understood. And of course, also then you have issues with, the issues would be very different for, if we take Mexico, I don't know, a large farm in the north, which might have 100,000 cattle head, and then smallholder farmers, which might be more isolated and desperate, and where there's a need to connect them, but also to sort of bring them all together into more investable groups. All of this, I mean, to some extent, blended finance can help deal with a lot of these issues, right? I think the deployment of catalytic, of concessional capital, can help kind of create better economic structures, economic incentives for investors who might want to deploy finance towards those climate-friendly solutions. But I'd say some of the key things to consider there are, I think first, and something we see a lot with our members, so CLIC being an investor coalition, we really see a prevalence in the need for the inclusion of technical assistance and technical assistance facilities in instrument design. It's crucial not just to give money, but also to help smallholders, train them up into how to use it, into how to increase yields, and how to have sort of to fulfill the potential that they can have. And I think that kind of goes back to Carlos's points about targeting underperforming farmers and really trying to make sure that we get the most out of everyone. So I'd say that's really one, and I think one is, and it's a tricky thing with blended finance where you need to be very hyper-localized in how you design things. You need to understand the local communities, work with actors on the ground to make sure that you're working with folks who are willing and who receive the support effectively. But then there's also those questions of, okay, how do you create scalable instruments that you can take and make work in one place and then replicate across the board? And so that's always quite tricky, but it is very hard to make any of this work without just having precise understanding of what's needed on the ground, of making sure that you're working with farmers who actually want to implement your solutions and who have the willingness, the ability, and the finances to kind of take on what for them might be a risk, especially if they're near or at sort of subsistence levels. So yeah, I think these are I think to me some of the key points I think to keep in mind. Of course, there's more than that, but I only have so many minutes to answer your question.
Yeah, unfortunately, we could talk about this all day long, I think, because it's quite complex. But there are some key issues here, which is like Gabriela mentioned, credit alone is not enough. And you need the financing to make the switch, but you also need the technical know-how, technical assistance. And then Carlos mentioned also the smallholders, which may be losing out a little bit in terms of accessing, whether it's investments or loans or technical assistance. So, Gabriela and Carlos, I would like to hear from you as well, starting out with Carlos. What are your views on these barriers, and where do you see, I mean, Carlos, you mentioned a lot of new instruments and policy initiatives now up to COP 30. One of them is the Tropical Forest Forever facility. But how do you see, I mean, how do we reconcile this sort of quite challenging landscape, and where do you see that the real priorities need to be?
Yeah. Should I start or Gabriela?
Go ahead, you first, Carlos.
Okay, thank you. I hope it's successful, but I think, we need to see the thing, because many people see this as the glass half empty, and we need to start seeing the glass half full. For instance, in the beef and soy sector in Brazil, for a number of years, there is already a kind of a Cerrado protocol to do exactly that, funding instruments, capacity building with beef, small and large farmers. There is a new catalytic fund coming by the end of this year, I guess. Beef, soy, not only Cerrado, but also the Amazon, the Chaco in Argentina and Paraguay, around $1 billion new money coming to solve all those issues. And it's becoming clear that, again, it's not only the funding, it's capacity building and engagement of these farms. I remember when I started doing my research ages ago, we started working in Pará, and deforestation, beef production. I read at that time in Pará, in Paragominas in this particular case, that were ranchers, like Gabriela mentioned, ranchers that had 3-4 cows per hectare instead of the average 1 cow per hectare. So we have loads of that. We've been talking to a lot of farmers and farmers associations, and I think there is also this idea of, but what's happening, the demographic is changing. Farmers are saying, the young generation are coming. They don't want to be just a beef producer. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to take advantage of all the think tanks in intelligence that's being built there. And I think people are connecting, really are connecting, even the government. To give you an example, to finalize, the Eco Invest program, they made a call for proposals. They went to New York, got some $2 billion or whatever, public funding, federal money, and that they brought to June this year, okay, to restore 1 million hectares of degraded pasture land in Brazil. We have 40, maybe, have more, but 1 million is a very good beginning. And the way they did it is a call for proposal from banks, public and private banks. And all banks came in using all their expertise, but also deploying not only funding, but risk analysis, capacity building, etc., etc. So I think this is the public policies there. How to move beyond is the main issue. We should put all the intelligence that or new knowledge that we're discussing here into a more operational type of mode. And I think it's really happening. Some more coordination maybe we need, but and I hope not only the TFFF fund, but all those examples are going to be pop up a lot in COP30 in Berlin, for sure.
Thanks again for your positive approach on this, Carlos, which is very much needed. How about you, Gabriela? I mean, what do you see as the most promising instruments or mechanisms out there? Or are there sort of other gaps that you see in terms of addressing these challenges we're discussing?
Well, I think a very key concept to talking about the policies, the environmental policies, is to understand how they shape incentives. We need to provide the right incentives to the producers. They are going to do what is easier and what is cheaper and what is more profitable to them. So if it is cheaper to grab a land or to the forest, take a very cheap credit, and the forest legal reservation, they are going to do it. So the policies that are thinking about incentives, that are thinking about how the farmers are going to react to this, are going to be the most successful ones. So we need to really understand what are the mechanisms that the farmers are taking to action and shape our policies into that. In this sense, I think that all the policies that provide incentives to silvopasturing systems are very promising. Also, all the policies that provide incentives to carbon storage are very promising to provide the right allocation of the activity. And also, every policy that comes together with strong monitoring and very well-defined eligible criteria is also very capable of generating amazing results.
Thanks so much for that, Gabriela. I don't see any questions here in the chat, and we have 5 minutes left. But so please, if anyone has any questions to us, please post them in the chat. But meanwhile, I have a long list of questions that I would very much like this distinguished panel to address. So one of them is really, I mean, we're talking about incentives, and we're basically talking about reward or punishment, carrot or the stick, to producers or to the industry as a whole. So my first question is, how can we hold the industry responsible, meat packers, retailers, investors, how to hold them accountable or incentivized to adopt these deforestation-free, low-carbon kind of supply chains that we are seeing. And I think from talking to producers, they often feel that there's more stick than the carrot. There's less reward than actually more punishment and more bureaucracy by being monitored all the time. So I would like to hear from you very briefly your take on this, how to find that sort of balance between positive incentives and reward versus monitoring and compliance. So I'll do the same as before, start with Alexandra and then Carlos and then Gabriela. Please go ahead, Alexandra.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to answer this briefly. I think, I think the sort of carrot side of thing is important, of course, right? But I think to some extent that doesn't always sort of mitigate the negative externalities and so on that you need to see leave, right? So I think it's true that creating premiums and whatnot for deforestation-free products and so on has strong potential to push things in the right direction. But I do think to some extent, sort of the regulatory environment is pretty critical to make sure that you do see the reductions in harm that are required and that are not just incentivized otherwise without that. Yeah, I think for the sort of the combination of the two and the balance between the two is crucial for things to happen.
Absolutely. What about you, Carlos? Stick with the carrots.
Yeah. Last week in Brazil, I don't know if you've seen this, Knut. Oh, you probably did. There was this beef on track, new IMA flora and others. Look at the entire supply chain, exactly. It's not easy, but again, there is a lot of thinking, instruments, mechanisms, and parametric studies, whatever, that should be put in place. And farmers, what we used to see, maybe not all of them, but farmers and farmers association, they want that. They want to get that on hold. I just received a paper, a brief paper from Professor Ricardo Abramovay, interesting, my last point, for FAO, who's going to be presenting this, I'll send you later, at COP30. And the paper states, well, agri-food system indirect cost in the world is around $12 trillion, 6 times the Brazilian economy, a lot more that the market, that societies pay for what they eat. That's why we're insisting we need to get the consumers also to make, contributions in order to have, okay, we are very good in exporting, we food security, etc. But also there need to be the work on incentives from the consumer side for that.
Precisely. As I understand it, you're talking about premiums, basically.
Not only premiums, but yeah, start with that.
Yeah. How about you, Gabriela? How do you see the balance between stick and the carrots?
I also believe that we need both together. I think that just one way of doing the things is not going to make a cohesive environment, economic environment, to generate the environmental goals that we are trying to achieve. And well, I will try to complement on Carlos a little bit. He talked about the demand. I am going to talk a little bit about the supply then. Well, I think we need traceable green supply chains, and this is very hard to achieve. And one of the loopholes that we need to look about is that in the various steps of the productive chain, we have several different producers, and these different producers have different profiles. So for the biggest cattle producers that are related to the Amazonian produced cattle are usually trying to hold good practices in the end of the supply chain, but it's very hard to trace back to the small producers that are doing the first steps of this productive chain. So these small local producers that usually have very extensive and inefficient production, that those are the ones that we need to target and really insert into this supply chain that has to be entirely traceable and green, so then we can have everything working properly.
That's a very good point, Gabriela. I think the smallholders, we cannot make this shift unless we have everyone on board, including the small, the medium, and the big-sized producers. Lastly, we are running out of time, but I would like also to have a very brief comment from each one of you. What are your expectations when it comes to COP30 in Belém, and what do you see as the concrete partnerships or outcomes that would be able to signal a real change or a momentum when it comes to sustainable livestock finance? Alexander first, you got a very short time, so please be brief.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think I'm interested to see in one of the, where some of those nature forestry related discussions go and how they could impact this, the TFFF work. I think CPI is also going to be talking about a new reforestation mechanism, which I'm interested to see more about. Yeah, I think lots of great things coming up, so it'll be good, and I'm hopeful that maybe we see stronger conclusions than maybe in the past for the sector.
Thank you. How about you, Carlos?
Sorry. So far, we see a lot of countries inserting land use beef, whatever, in their NDCs, which is quite good. More needs to be done, but I think this is going to be important message, political message for the world. I'm sure that on the roadmap of the financing side, Baku, Belém, the ministers are working on that. And the Circle of Finance, Minister of Finance just presented their Circle of Finance for COP30. Certainly land use is strong on that, is coming. There are some other issues, but I think, so that from that side, I think we're gonna see good or positive results. And there's a big demand on adaptation to climate change. This is an issue that we need to work a lot more. We have done ours, we are doing again the Plano Clima of Brazil. But I mean, it's there already, right? I mean, that's we should work a lot more on that.
Thank you. And how about you, Gabriela?
Well, this is supposed to be the COP of implementation, and I believe we can do that. We already agreed on the context, we understand very well the problems, we have amazing ideas, mechanisms, solutions, and proposals. I think that given this scenario, we can have a lot of optimism about this COP.
And for sure, we will need optimism. So this is a good starting point, I think. And by this, we have come to the end of this webinar. This was a small teaser leading up to COP30. But I would thank you. A big thanks also to our panel of experts. And please also to the audience, if you would like to get in touch with us and further discuss this topic, then please leave a comment in the chat. And I would again strongly encourage participants to have a look at CPI's publications, and we all hope for a very fruitful COP30 with implementation on track and some good initiatives coming out of COP30. This video will be posted, this webinar will be posted at CPI's YouTube channel, and also, as mentioned, there will be also Spanish and Portuguese version of the roadmap report available. Thank you so much, all of you, and have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.